Welcome to everyone for coming to our panel discussion today on studying in a non-English speaking country when you don't speak the language. Today we have three panelists joining us. We have two students, Jack Letty from Vassar College, who studied in Greece, Caitlin Connell from Mount Holyoke, who studied in the Netherlands. And then we are also being joined by Jonathan Key, who is the director of CIE programs in the Netherlands, to offer the perspective of an organization who hosts study abroad students. So today, Jack and Caitlin will share their personal experiences of what it was like studying in a country where they didn't speak the local language. They'll talk about their expectations versus the realities and maybe offer some tips on how to engage with the culture despite a language barrier. And then Jonathan will offer insights into the academics and cultural programming and support services for students participating in a program where they don't speak the local language. My name is Greta Decker. I am the Assistant Director of International Programs at Vassar College, and I will be co-facilitating this panel discussion with my colleague April Stroud, who is the Director of Study Abroad at Mount Holyoke. Throughout the presentation, if you have any questions, feel free to put them into the chat, and we'll answer them at the end of the presentation. There will also then be additional time afterwards for more Q&A. So without further ado, I'm going to turn this over to Caitlin, and she can talk about her experiences on her program.
Great, thank you. I do have a quick presentation that I put together with just some photos. If I'm able to, let's see, share my screen. Is that? If a host could help me. And I think it's disabled for screen sharing. Great.
I can't, oh, there we go. Got it.
Great, okay. Hello everyone, my name is Caitlin and I'm a current senior at Mount Holyoke College. So I studied abroad in the fall of 2019, so about a year ago in Amsterdam. So the program I was a part of was through CIEE, and it was in their social sciences and humanities program, but there was also a business program which offered slightly different classes. That was another option people chose. So the reason I chose to study abroad here was mainly due to the class selection that was offered. There wasn't a language requirement at my school or for the CIEE program, which meant I didn't need to have any prior understanding of Dutch and wasn't required to take an intro to Dutch class. This allowed me more flexibility in choosing my classes because I needed 2 classes mainly to be on track for graduation in order to transfer these credits from study abroad. And so these are the ones that have the asterisk next to them. So I needed to take a cross-cultural psychology class, and I needed to, at the time, take a GIS spatial awareness class because I thought I was going to be minoring in environmental studies. So these were 2 classes I had to take. And there are a lot of options for class selection since it was through both CIEE, but you can also take classes at the University of Amsterdam, which was why I was able to take such a intense GIS class. The rest, Race in the Netherlands and then Contemporary Dutch Social Policy, were both through CIEE and allowed me to experience the culture in a way other than a language class. So I wanted to engage in more cultural aspects like history, race relations, and politics. So while I didn't have the opportunity or the time in my schedule to take an intro to Dutch class, I was able to engage in other aspects of the Dutch culture. And outside of the class, I was able to pick up pieces of the language and engage in language outside the classroom. Great. Okay, so for language opportunities, there were multiple aspects that helped kind of influence and increase my understanding of the Dutch language. So one opportunity was through CIEE Teach, which was a program that happened about once a week, where a few of my classmates and I would go to a Dutch classroom and teach a little lesson about something from the US. So for example, I was looking back at slides in preparation for this presentation, and I realized this would have probably been the week or next week where we were discussing Halloween. And so we kind of brought in some vocab from the US and kind of explained the tradition. And then at the end, we always offered the opportunity for students to share their experience, their traditions, as well as their language components for those traditions. So there was always an exchange of language at the very end, which was great. So I picked up some phrases, and with this, students were also able to share music and then again, share their traditional differences. The second opportunity I had was just living in Amsterdam. So even though I wasn't specifically taking a language course, just being in Amsterdam allowed me to pick up some phrases and words that were really helpful in kind of real world skills. So for example, signs, stores, public transportation, all of these aspects of living in Amsterdam had Dutch language opportunities. So I was able to pick up vocabulary that was useful, even if I wasn't actually in a classroom. It was more of a outside the classroom experience. And then here are just some pictures. So biking, of course, stroopwafels, and then the central station. So two more areas where there were language opportunities were through museums and excursions that classes and the program itself offered. So through specific classes, we were able to take or go to museums in different areas in the city. And this really helped not only just increase cultural awareness and cultural understanding, but there were also language aspects to it. So for example, going to a museum, there were always Dutch elements to it, especially with paintings where it would be a Dutch title. And then additionally, going to other places outside of Amsterdam increased different aspects of vocab, and then also increase cultural awareness. So kind of getting a wider view of what the Dutch language is like and the Dutch culture. And then finally, even though I didn't take a specific Intro to Dutch language class, a lot of my classmates did. So it was a popular option, but also in other classes, there were areas where terms and phrases would come up, as well as different historical lenses that would incorporate Dutch vocab and Dutch ideological ideas. So just little pieces throughout my experience in Amsterdam helped me learn different phrases and words. And even though I wasn't able to communicate in a way that maybe the Intro to Language class really helped with, I was able to still experience some parts of the language. And so I was nervous. So one of the challenges for me was that I was nervous about being able to connect with Dutch people. And, you know, if I wasn't able to speak the language, I was wondering how that would work out, even though a lot of people in Amsterdam are very proficient in English. But it ended up not being a problem, just because everyone was just super, they were just super nice about speaking English, and then also kind of sharing Dutch words or phrases that maybe I didn't know. I remember at one point I needed to schedule an appointment for an electrical check for my apartment, and it was all in Dutch. So I asked one of the directors if they could help me schedule the appointment, and it was just a super helpful thing for them to do. And it also taught me a few things more about kind of Dutch language and Dutch culture. But I ended up being able to connect with other students and it worked out really well. So even though I was hesitant about not taking a language class, I was very thankful that I was able to experience it outside the classroom, as well as take classes that added to my cultural understanding of Dutch culture and history. And with that, I think I will pass it over to our next presenter.
All right, thanks. So my name is Jack Letty. I'm a senior at Vassar, and I spent last fall in Athens, Greece, with a program called CIEE. CIEE stands for College Year in Athens. And I think to start, I'll just tell you a little bit about the program. So I guess the reason that I chose it is because I am an anthropology major, and they had a lot of really interesting classes that were relating to what I wanted to study. But I also just found it to be the most interesting area that a program was available in. I guess taking a program that where you don't need a language requirement, where it's not like French or Italian or Spanish. A lot of the options are just like England or Australia or New Zealand, which are, I'm sure, really exciting, but I definitely wanted to be in a place where I didn't speak the language. And so I think that kind of fed into why I chose this program, and it turned out to be super rewarding, so I'm really glad that I did. For as far as like my expectations of the language, I definitely didn't prepare maybe as much as I should have. And just speaking to that, I would definitely recommend just picking up like a phrase book or a couple of simple, like learn how to say hello, please, thank you. Those kind of things can go a really long way. And it was hard to land in the country and not really have anything, which was definitely a mistake on my part. But that's something that I learned from it. It's just huge. Even if you don't ever get to be fluent or conversational, that is one of the most important things you can do, I think, to just be able to greet people and say these basic things. But moving on from that, I actually, I did take Intro to Modern Greek when I was there. So to speak to that experience, I think that it really allowed me to just have a richer cultural experience. It helped to make connections with people from Athens, people from Greece. It made it a lot easier to get around the city and to just feel more comfortable, I think, was a really important part of that. So a couple of the things that we learned in the class, just some of the most, it was very focused on practicalities. So we learned about ordering food and coffee, public transit, how to get around, and then like small talk. So it wasn't, I think it's important to kind of go into it with the understanding that you're probably not going to be fluent by the end of it. But it's still super exciting to be able to exchange even a few sentences with a native speaker and then be able to come to them having like put in all this effort, and that feels really good, I think, probably on their end and on your end as well. It was definitely difficult though, and so one of the other things is just like frustrations, and part of that is there were definitely a lot of times when I would try to speak to someone in Greek and they would just immediately respond in English, which was a little bit disheartening. Or you'll make silly mistakes with pronunciation or grammar, and that's absolutely going to happen. But it's like the best way to learn. And I think that was the other difficult thing, was learning to kind of get through those slip ups, the mistakes, the kind of little embarrassing moments, and learn to take it in stride and just try again and not let it bother you. Yeah, and then by the end of the program, as many of those as there were, it just like nothing feels better than being able to go into a coffee shop or a restaurant or something and like not even need to speak any English. That is such a cool thing to do. It's a lot of fun, and so it's definitely all worth it in the end. Another thing that was really a huge benefit of the language, which I mentioned a little bit before, is the social relationships that it allows you to have. The program CIEE mostly takes place in one small neighborhood in Athens. So what the result of that is that all the local vendors kind of know the program, and they know that there's always these American students around town who are learning Greek and who are trying to get into the culture. So a lot of them will be really friendly and open. They have discounts for members in the program. They like to talk to you, figure out where you're from, and hear you practice your language. So there's a lot of, just through the program having been there for so long, a lot of infrastructure set up. And I'm sure this is the case with a lot of other programs too, for you to just practice, get to know people. They're super friendly. They love chatting. And you can kind of build relationships with some of the people who live in the area, who work in the area, people that you'll be interacting with on a daily basis because you're there for several months. And then even beyond those people, just chatting with anyone you meet. I had a really great experience probably towards the end of the time when I was a little bit more conversational. And I had a chat with a cab driver one night, and he actually gave me his phone number, and I was able to text him, and he was like, "Oh, text me, I'll tell you about the best places to eat in this neighborhood." And so that was really exciting. And I think that's something that I maybe wouldn't have ever had if I didn't feel confident enough to try to talk to him. And like having some of the language was a huge part of that. So to get into some tips for learning the language, Caitlin already mentioned this, but signs was a really big part of it, especially because in Greek and in a lot of other languages too, but it's a different alphabet. So that was maybe the most difficult like stumbling block was just like immediately you're confronted with different letters and you have to learn how to read them. And that's the first thing you have to do if you want to figure out the language. So just reading every sign, that's what my roommates and I would do. Just wandering around the city is point at things and read them to each other. And it can be a lot of fun. Just they're all over the place. There's constant opportunities to try to better your understanding. And another one would be like practice with your other English speaking friends. At least in this program, and I think I've heard in a few others too, we were with other roommates from like that were in the program. So you're pretty much in my living space, at least I was surrounded by other English speakers. And so that can make it a little more difficult to like immerse or force yourself to do it. But it's really nice to be able to have people that you can also practice with who are in the same situation on the other hand. So that was a lot of fun. And I had friends who, on the one hand, maybe didn't take any language course. And so I could kind of like, they were also often asking to like be taught, like, oh, well, how do you say this? How do you say that? Which is a great way to practice. And on the other hand, friends who were in higher level courses who may have taken it before. And so they could teach me. So it worked both ways, really. Like I said before, super important, just try talking to local people. It's like daunting, very daunting, but even if you mess up, people are very friendly about it generally. And most people in Athens, I don't know about all places, but in a lot of places, they do speak English, at least some of it. And so if you really find yourself totally lost, you have that like safety net if you totally need it. But yeah, just like trying it out is really, really important. Another thing would be, I think that this comes along with learning the language and feeling more comfortable in the city, in the area, but seeking out events, like really being proactive and exploring, trying to find exciting things to do. One tip that I started doing, I didn't get this until like halfway through, but if you find a place that you like a music venue or a bar or a cafe or something, follow them on Facebook or on Instagram or something, and they post like updates and when they're having like music or having, I don't know, any kind of performance. I got to go to some really cool like art shows and concerts and stuff because of doing that. And there's like all kinds of ways to engage on social media with different places. So that's a really, I think, good way to find things to do and things to engage with. And then to wrap up, I think just like I've been talking about this a little bit throughout, but having the language really just made me feel so much more at home there. And it made it, I mean, just practically speaking, of course, it made it easier to get around, easier to know where I was, what I was doing, but just feeling like I wasn't a total like foreigner, total stranger to it. And as you live in a city for a long time and as you practice the language, that will definitely come. And as it does, just getting more and more comfortable, you feel more willing to explore further, go off the beaten path, and have some like truly unique experiences. I got to go to an Ethiopian food festival once. That was really cool. Some, yeah, like I said, some art galleries. I actually ended up one night at a really avant-garde performance art piece just in someone's apartment. It was just, so you can really, if you're willing to like put yourself out there and practice and try to learn the language and like communicate with people, it can be super, super rewarding. So I think that's it for me.
Great, thank you, Jack, for sharing your experiences, and we'll turn this over to Jonathan now.
There we go. Thank you so much. Wow, Jack, Caitlin, two great ambassadors for study abroad. Caitlin, thank you so much for doing all the heavy lifting, really, and providing me with a lot of great segues into the program here in Amsterdam. So my name is Jonathan Key, and I have the honor of being the center director in Amsterdam, where, as Caitlin said, we offer two programs. One is a social sciences and humanities program, so a broader liberal arts program, and the other is a business and economics program. And what I thought I would do is that I would show you some clips from videos that you can find on YouTube. All you need to do is put into the search box CIEE Amsterdam. And these are all made by former CIEE students. So you really get it straight from the horse's mouth, with the one exception being this first video that I'm going to show you. And that's one that I produced, or that CIEE produced, but features me in a starring role. So this is the city of Amsterdam, and this will look very familiar to Caitlin, because this is right outside the Amsterdam Study Center. So this is our study center, and across the street from the study center is the University of Amsterdam. And Caitlin already talked about the hybrid nature of the program. So all of our students both enroll in classes at the University of Amsterdam or through CIEE itself. And that provides students with a way to get to know Dutch people from the very outset. Because at the University of Amsterdam, our students are taking classes with other international students, but primarily with other Dutch students. So even if you're not taking the language, and Caitlin didn't take a language class, taking a course at a host institution like the University of Amsterdam provides you with those connections that will help you explore not just the language, but Dutch culture. So we'll continue the video. It'll shift back to me. Oh, there we go. This is the University of Amsterdam, our host institution. This is the bench which Caitlin may have sat on. And then this, of course, are some beauty shots of the most beautiful city in the world, which is the city of Amsterdam. Of course, the canal belt heavily featured in these shots. And now I'm taking you into the study center. So this is our base of operations. Staff work upstairs, and then downstairs, which I will point to, I'm assuming, in a couple of seconds, we have our classroom. So as Caitlin mentioned, and this is another great image to pause on, we teach our own classes, call them CIEE classes, and this is true in Amsterdam. It's also true all over the world where we run programs. We teach a number of classes that complement the course offering at the local host institution. So Caitlin talked about the fact that she was able to take cross-cultural psychology, and that's a class that we offer ourselves. Classes like race in the Netherlands, Dutch public health, contemporary Dutch social policy. So for those students who aren't taking a language class, we provide those students with opportunities to learn more about Dutch culture. That said, beginning Dutch is our most popular class. So we do find that the vast majority of students who come into the program will want to take a Dutch language class. And Jack already talked about the approach to language that CYA took. In many ways, that's also our approach at CIEE. So you're not going to be hit over the head with grammar. We're not asking you to learn the past perfect tense in a semester. we want to set you up for success during your study abroad. So it's very pragmatic, it's very practical, it's things you can actually use, and it's always based on day-to-day scenarios that students like you might find yourselves in during your study abroad. And we do it right downstairs at our study center, and that's where a lot of our CIE classes take place. I'm going to switch videos now and shift to the student perspective. So first of all, this student is showing off where she lives. And I'm not sure if Caitlin's housing was the same because we work with multiple housing partners, but this is one of our housing partners in Amsterdam. And this gives you a pretty good sense of what the housing looks like in the city of Amsterdam. So you have your private room, regardless of the housing option that you choose. You have an ensuite bathroom, and then you have a shared kitchen setup. And this student is sort of showing off her housing that we work with here in Amsterdam, waving to the screen and then showing the city of Amsterdam a little bit more. However, what I really want to talk about is homestays. And we haven't talked about homestays yet, but if you don't speak the language, but you're interested in learning how to speak it, and you really want to do a deep dive into the local culture, whether that's in Athens or whether it's in Amsterdam, there is no better way to achieve that than living with a homestay family for your semester abroad. That's my own personal opinion and bias because I'm a product of a homestay. I studied abroad in the US for a full year, and I lived with a homestay family for that year. And I was shaped by that experience in ways that I wouldn't have been if I had stayed at a dorm. Not to sort of cast aspersions on dorms, but if you are interested in sort of that deep dive into Dutch culture, doing a homestay, which we provide, and we make sure that you are matched with families that share your interests, is really the best way to sort of explore that culture in detail and get a sense of what it means to live in Amsterdam, to be Dutch, what a day in the life of Dutch people is like. If that sounds a little bit daunting, doing it for the full semester, at CIEE we also offer what are called weekend homestays. So for 1 weekend only, you live with a homestay family and you get to explore life with them as well. In addition to what we just talked about, here we have another student sort of showing what her daily commute is. This program is one, and this might be a school that might look familiar to Caitlin. Caitlin talked about the TEACH program, and in many ways the TEACH program is, I would argue, sort of our crown jewel in terms of the extracurricular activities that we offer. We work with a number of schools. This is one of those schools in Amsterdam. And students have the ability for an entire semester to take over the English language curriculum. So this is not just going into a classroom for a quick class. You're really responsible for ensuring that the students that you're teaching meet all of their requirements in terms of English language for that semester. So it's a great way to not only learn about Dutch culture, because those children teach you a lot about Dutch culture in the process, but you're also being an ambassador for the US, and you're representing and sharing information about US culture that has a really profound impact on these young minds and these young learners. And you get a sense of what going to school as a kid is like in the Netherlands, what the classroom is like. And of course, this was right during Christmas time, so you get a sense of how kids in the Netherlands celebrate. And then lastly, I quickly wanted to show you a couple of examples of excursions. Excursions are another great way to get to know the local culture. We provide a number of those excursions, but we also ensure that students have the ability and have the knowledge to go on those excursions themselves. So this is part of a CIEE excursion that we took students on. This is to an iconic little town in the Netherlands called Giethoorn, which is this sort of picture book, storybook representation of ye olde life in the Netherlands. But that's an activity that we take students on as well. And it's an example of the type of cultural excursion that we would offer. It gets even more traditional. You can't go to the Netherlands without eating. This is represented here as well. Cheese, of course, being a huge part of the local culture. And then, of course, there's clogs. So we also took students to a clog making factory, although factory is maybe a little bit too big of a word for what the actual operation is, but you get to see how clogs are made and what that process looked like. So quickly wanted to show you an example of that too. Jack already talked about that moment when you arrive in a new culture and you're excited, but you also have some concerns and you don't necessarily know what to do or where to go, and you may not have the language skills. And that's why we also offer in Amsterdam the opportunity for all students to take part in a university orientation that is led by Dutch students, so that Dutch students from the get-go, from the very first week, sort of take you by the hand, sometimes literally, show you around the city of Amsterdam, and you hear it from your peers, you hear it from other Dutch students who are studying at the university, which is another great way of sort of easing you into this culture, which at the beginning can seem a little bit alien and a little bit foreign. So I hope that I didn't go over my time, and I hope that I also gave you a little bit of a snapshot of studying abroad, and specifically how we provide pathways for you to integrate into the culture, even though you may not know the language and you may not be taking a Dutch language class.
Great, Jonathan, thank you so much. That was great to have the perspective from the actual study abroad organization, what you do and how you support the students if they don't know the language, but how to help them get immersed in the culture. I think that's something important to keep in mind for students. A lot of the times, if you're going to a program in a non-English speaking country and you don't speak the language, it will often be through a study abroad organization such as CIEE. So you will have that support network and those support providers there for you. You're not going to have to try and figure everything out on your own. Like Jack had in Greece, he had CIEE there for him on the ground. So just because you don't speak the language doesn't mean you won't have a support network already in place for you. That always helps when you adjust to the new culture in the country. But for now, we're going to open it up to questions. You can put them into the chat, or if you want to unmute yourself and just ask them, please feel free. All questions, no question is a bad question. The only bad question is the unasked question, because you'll never get an answer. No, shy group today. Well, I will ask a question for Jack and Caitlin. Was there a way that you felt was the best way to really interact with locals? Is there certain things you did in order to interact more with other local students or just locals in general?
Yeah, well, so for me, we weren't in CIE, we weren't right near another college or university or anything, so there weren't a lot of other students around, but people who lived in the neighborhood, I think a great way to get started is just start integrating yourself into spaces in the neighborhood. Like go to coffee shops to study, you know, and start going there maybe like on a regular basis, kind of almost like put yourself into the shoes of someone who is a local and just like inhabit all of those spaces. And then it becomes more natural. You can kind of start to talk to maybe people who work at those places or just other customers. You might start to recognize people. Another great way is with your neighbors. At least we lived in an apartment building, so there were people in our building. And yeah, it's definitely, like I said, it's really daunting, but it's just like a great thing to do to start up a conversation with somebody, just even something simple.
So for me, my University of Amsterdam class was actually heavily focused on partner projects. And so that was really helpful in just meeting other Dutch students because you have to meet outside of class and coordinate schedules. And so kind of just getting that experience and making those connections was really helpful, especially when wasn't quite sure where the lab was for one of my classes. So just kind of making those connections in class was really helpful. And then outside of class, similar to what Jack was saying, is just like making connections with your neighbors. We had a WhatsApp group chat for our whole building, and that included Dutch students, international students, and then also students who were in CIEE. So just working on making those connections and talking to people around you, and then also in classes were really helpful for doing that.
Great, thank you. And then we have a question. So you both spoke about the generosity and willingness of the locals to help you. Did that surprise you at all? Like, were you worried about that beforehand, or?
Yeah, I mean, definitely. It was, I mean, I think that I wasn't expecting them to be really unfriendly or anything, but I think coming into like a foreign space, it's really daunting in that I was scared of like being seen as a tourist, as like annoying, or as yeah, like someone unwelcome. And that was never the case. People there are generally super friendly, very welcoming, very warm. And also it definitely helped, like I said, just even learning basic greetings and being able to kind of meet them on their own terms, because I think that even just that small thing alone will like set you apart a little bit as someone who's willing to make the effort, and someone who's not just like just there to see the Parthenon, but someone who's there to really experience the culture and like get to know people. And that definitely goes a long way, and I could feel that effort being appreciated by people.
I wasn't quite sure what to expect, but I think I was just so nervous about kind of trying to figure out my way, and if I'll feel like connected to where I was studying abroad. And so I also had that similar fear of like, oh, maybe I'll be seen as a tourist, and maybe, you know, that won't be the best thing. So I was like surprised, and it ended up working out really well. And again, just making those connections, I feel like helped me feel more less like a tourist and more like a student who was experiencing the culture.
Great, thank you, Jack and Caitlin. Question for you, Jonathan. So you see new students arrive each semester. Do group dynamics change a student's experience? Are some groups more adventurous than others?
Thank you for that question. We do see a fair number of groups come by on a yearly basis, because in addition to semester programs, we also run a plethora of short-term programs. We have a January program. We have a number of different summer programs that we run. And there's certainly I would say, a noticeable difference between students who study abroad for a full semester and students who study abroad for a short-term experience. In many ways, semester students have the benefit of knowing that they have 4 months to explore, in my case, Amsterdam. So they get to take their time, they get to pace themselves before they sort of go full hog into that study abroad experience that they've been looking forward to. In terms of the group per group differences, if we're looking just at one program, like the semester program, those exist, but I would say on the whole, if we're looking at the spring term or we're looking at the fall term, the students that come to Amsterdam are students who have thought about that decision. They're very deliberate in choosing Amsterdam, whether it's for the coursework that they're able to do or because they're interested in the Netherlands as a socially progressive country and they want to explore those topics that Amsterdam has become synonymous with. They're a very conscientious group in that sense. The inner group dynamics, however, are always different. So especially if you have bigger groups of students, At CIE, we try during the orientation to break up students into as many different constellations so that students have the ability to get to know as many students as possible during that pivotal first week or first 2 weeks of the program. Because after that period, a lot of students go their own way, right? Everyone has different class schedules. They live in different housing types. So those first 2 weeks are really essential to sort of navigate those group dynamics. None of our students need any help with being adventurous. So sometimes when we, at the study center at our office, on Friday, we'll sort of ask, where are you off to? And everyone is always off to some country. They're traveling. They're seizing on every single moment in time to travel. We haven't talked about COVID yet, so this might be a good point in time to talk about COVID. I think COVID will change that. And I think the future of study abroad will be one where students will be less inclined to travel as much as they used to and to spend more time in the host country. And I don't think that's a bad thing. You know, every cloud has a silver lining. And often students at the end of a term will tell us that they wish they had spent more time in Amsterdam. They wish they had traveled less. They wish they had had a couple more weekends just to stay put in Amsterdam. And I think if we're looking at the future of study abroad post-COVID, I think that will be one of the changes of what it means to study abroad, is to really be rooted in that, that local host culture.
Great, Jonathan, thank you. And thank you for bringing up the COVID question and the future of study abroad. And I think that's a great point. Students, I know you often love to country hop to get as much on your passport as you can while you're abroad, but sometimes that can take away from the immersive nature of the culture that you're actually in. So as Jonathan said, like, there's a silver lining. So you'll get more in-depth into your host culture in the future, most likely. Do we have any other questions from the group? I'm hoping that from this session, you learned that there are lots of options out there for you to study abroad while you can study in English-speaking countries like in the UK or Australia or New Zealand, and those are great options. There are lots of other options available to you as well in Greece, the Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, Czech Republic, Hungary, and you don't have to know the local language to still have a rich and fulfilling experience. It might be uncomfortable at times, but it's a good discomfort. It's the learning discomfort, like when you went away to college for the first time, or if you're presenting to a room of 200 people, you'll get the butterflies, but it'll be a learning and a growing experience. And I think Caitlin and Jack can both say, like, despite moments of discomfort, I hope they're both glad with the choices they made for the programs and the countries they went to. So I'd like to thank Jack and Caitlin and Jonathan for joining us and presenting today. We appreciate all of your perspectives. And I hope everyone has a nice day. Thank you.